Welcome, everybody. Can everybody hear me from the back? Okay, heads up, heads up. Okay, we have some technical issues we're dealing with, so if you can't hear us, please let us know. Raise your hand or shout out. Okay. I didn't hear that, Jerry.
I said, or throw a stone.
Or no. All the stones are up front. You stay seated. Okay, welcome to tonight's presentation. If stones could talk, what stories would they tell us? Because we have a really good group here tonight. Tell me, do stones talk to you too? Anybody? Anybody? Okay. They sure do to me. They sure do to Alice, and they sure do to Tim. Last winter, after the Van Gogh exhibit in Pittsburgh, we presented a follow-up multi-part series on Van Gogh's life. That was so well received that we've been asked many times to do some more programs about art in Pittsburgh, art theory, other than just teaching classes in the art studio. So this is our next presentation, the beginning of a series of programs that we hope you'll enjoy and continue to attend. Art is everywhere. That is our theme, and that will be our theme going forward. During tonight's presentation, you're going to hear us interchange the words stones with rocks. Are they the same? Are they different? Very simply, rocks are hard material of Earth's crust exposed on the surface of the Earth. Stones, on the other hand, are non-metallic matter. For example, quartz, clay, calcium. There are over 200 minerals you could choose from, of which rocks are made. You will hear three very different perspectives from your presenters: art in nature, contemporary landscape art, and in architecture. You will also hear very uniquely different presentation styles. That way you're not going to fall asleep tonight. One thing that is common, all three of us, Tim, Alice, and I, live here at Masonic. So we have to be good because we walk the halls afterwards, right? Alice is a docent for the Carnegie Museum of Art, and she will share wonderful stories about landscape painting and contemporary land art. She's an artist in her own right, and I don't know if you've seen her, but I have seen her plein air painting on campus. Look for her. Many of you have been with Tim Merrill on his walking tours of Sewickley and Pittsburgh. He is docent for the Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation and will tell us some interesting stories about the stones reflected in Pittsburgh's architecture. I'm Donna Billings. I'm chair of the art studio, and in my tribe outside Masonic Village, I'm known as the Cairn Hiker. I follow cairns, I collect rocks, and so we are going to begin with me and beginning with art in nature. I'm going to share some of my stories about the beauty, the history, the artistry, and the spirit of cairns, labyrinths, and spiritual monuments around the world, and how these stories have talked to me over the many years when I was still able to hike. So let's start with the word cairns. Cairns are really an old world GPS system. They've been around for thousands of years. From Acadia to Mongolia, people have been stacking stones, marking paths, tombs, and the sides of mountains. Is this art? Or is this a lifeline to surviving? Haven't you ever wondered? Maybe you've never seen a cairn before. If not, you're in for a treat. The definition of a cairn comes from the Gaelic, meaning heap of stones. Very simple. And that's exactly what a cairn is, a heap of stones. Carefully located navigational aids. The Norse sailors marked land long before lighthouses, long before GPS cell phones. They were placed along single tracks and roads to mark trails. They were very critical to safety and the well-being of foot travelers near the oceans. In the deserts in the high Arctic, humans relied on rock stacks to get them through the deserts and deep snows. They helped nomads move from settlement to settlement before water ran out. For example, several years ago, quite a few years ago actually, I hiked the 4-day trail to the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. And we saw cairns all along that 4-day hike. And we could easily see how they guided the explorers to the ruins. As the American West was settled many years ago, cairns showed property lines. Cairns can also be spiritual guides. They exist because of the kindness of strangers, someone who doesn't know us making sure we find our way to the end. Anybody who's ever been lost in the forest knows and have seen cairns, you know how welcoming they are. When you see them, you know you're really on the right path. For example, the Camino de Santiago is a 500-mile footpath through Spain and France. Hikers heap conical spheres on that 30 to 35-day journey to the grave of the Apostle St. James. Cairns are used at spiritual ceremonies and gatherings. They can be large, they can be small. One of the oldest recorded cairns listed dates back to the year 872 AD in Iceland. So let's look at a couple of cairns. Cairns are large. Stones not only mark navigational paths, especially in cold, desolate areas like Iceland, and this is in Western Iceland, but they also have a spiritual meaning. I want to introduce you to Bader. Isn't he a handsome dude? Bader is a house-sized cairn. He's 19 and a half feet tall, high, and he's made of pelagonite. And notice, if you can see, right between his legs, there's some little dots. That's the rest of our tour group. So you can see the immensity of this cairn. The gentleman on the left happens to be my dear sweet husband in the back of the room, trying to take a picture. So you can see how high he was. So Bader Snæfellsnes is his name. Snæ means snow, Fels means mountain, Ness means peninsular. There are almost no trees in Iceland. Therefore, it was even more crucial for people to find their way in heavy winter weather. Bader is a mythical protector of the Snæfellsnes Peninsula in western Iceland. I had to practice that one quite often. The Icelandic people share their history in the form of stories and fables. Bader is believed to have been the first settler on the island, half troll, half man, who stood guard for the ancient Norse, Celtic, and Scottish sailors. This cairn symbolizes his connection to the earth and his own physicality. Bader is a place marker, and Bader is art. When any tours that go into Iceland, generally if you're in western Iceland, you do go to see Mr. Bader. He was built by an Icelandic artist, Ragnar Kastansson, who was not only a cairn maker, he's done lots of cairns in Iceland, but he's also a performance and contemporary multidisciplinary artist. Today, it's illegal to build cairns in Iceland, and they're very serious about this. They have a 12-point traveler's code making it illegal to remove stones or build cairns. This is advice that's more important than keeping water clean in the country or remembering never to drive off the road. And you could easily drive off the road in Iceland. And people were very serious about this, as I learned very quickly when I was severely reprimanded by our guide because I was trying to build my normal cairn along the beach. Most cairns, though, are not quite as big as Mr. Bader. Here are 4 different cairns I'd like to talk about, all in the United States, most in the United States. So cairns come in all different shapes and sizes. For wilderness hikers, there's a connection, and they tell us, hey, this way, you're on the right path. And in the shores, we all have a positive experience and that we get to our destination safely. In Maine's Acadia National Park, see if I can do this correctly. I'm not. It's in the upper left-hand corner with the sunrise. This is Maine's Acadia National Park. There are more than 100 cairns throughout the national park. They're called the Bates Cairns, designed by a forest ranger back in the early 1900s who recognized the importance of cairns for travelers. There are more than 100 of them, and they're shaped like miniature stone bridges with 2 base rock columns, a mantle, and on the top the smallest rock, which is a pointer that tells you the way to the next destination. It's part of their culture, and the rangers at Acadia National Park preserve these ancient cairns. In fact, there are several people called cairn wanderers, that regularly hike the trails in Acadia National Park just to make sure that the cairns have not been tampered with. In the upper right-hand corner is Canyonlands National Park, a totally different looking cairn. Their cairns are all over the park. They welcome hikers to build the cairns to lead people through the trails. It's a large park, and the rangers can't keep up with it, and people regularly get lost hiking there. In the lower left is called an Inukshuk. These cairns are located basically in Canada, all over Canada. And you can see it kind of looks like a person, the lower left-hand corner. It means points the way. It's a likeness of a person, and they're put in different places around Canada to show respect. In the olden days, back in the time, the very beginnings, these cairns called Inukshuks helped people in hunting caribou. And on the right side is just a little aside. Many of you here know that I have a new dog called River. Well, that was River's predecessor, Mr. Magoo. And there are cairns also here in Pittsburgh. This is the Cairns Trail in the North Park. And I put Mr. Magoo in there just to show you a perspective of how the cairns are. And I really think those cairns weren't made to point the way. People like me just like building cairns. So let's shift our attention from stones and rocks as navigational tools to labyrinths that tell a different but still a beautiful kind of story. Some people believe cairns and labyrinths share a common DNA. Both are symbols of a journey, of a pointing towards a change of thinking, change of life, change of thought. Both feel like pilgrimages made with the intention to find calm and peace within. Labyrinths consist of a single, continuous winding path to a center point and then back out again, as opposed to mazes, which have multiple paths that may branch off and may not necessarily lead to the center. Labyrinths are generally made of granite, sand, fallen pine needles, rocks. I've walked one that was made of pennies. I've also walked one that was made of pieces of colored cloth to represent teenagers who were no longer with us. I've walked them around the world, New Zealand, Africa, Iceland, throughout the Southwest. But the most unusual, and the two that have talked to me the most, are the ones I hiked in the Isle of Iona on a narrow strip of land with ocean roaring on either side of me, the wind blowing 100 miles an hour. It was a very spiritual, and that labyrinth talked to me. The other one is locally behind the Cairns Spirituality Center in Pittsburgh. Has anybody here walked that labyrinth in Pittsburgh? It's right by the Passavant Hospital in McCandless. Unlike cairns, you don't necessarily leave anything behind, but many do. For example, and the Cairns Spirituality Labyrinth is the one on the right side and the bottom left. The one on the top left just shows you a sample of what a labyrinth looks like. But anyway, many people at the Cairns Spirituality Center do leave things. I have seen jewelry, initials, flowers, shoes, and I always wonder when I walk that labyrinth, who was here before me? What story are they trying to tell? What are they getting from walking this labyrinth? I took my step-great-grandchildren, ages 8, 10, and 12, to this particular labyrinth one Christmas several years ago. Had them walk the labyrinth with me, and it was interesting to see the difference in their personalities. And the conversations we had afterwards was absolutely marvelous. I learned a lot about my great-grandchildren. They learned a lot about their grandmother. But so it was a spiritual journey of a different kind. Taking a little different tack now, rocks and stones shout out their history. This is a boat trip on Lake Powell on the Colorado River. These rocks, can you see how they shout out stories about our environment? Glen Canyon Dam is one of the largest man-made dams in the world that created Lake Powell. It's been controversial since the day it was built. Why? Because the environmentalists argue that the reservoir was unnecessary and destroyed the canyon's ecosystem. Do you notice the demarcation line between the white at the top? That is called the bathtub ring. And it shows the high water mark. Since the time when the dam was built, the water mark was up at the top. And over the years, because of the droughts and the severe droughts, the most severe droughts in history, the one on the left was when Glenn and I were there in 2013. So you can see the dark part and the white part is about 50-50. The picture on the right is the same general area that was taken last year. The bathtub mark is like 75-25%. Last year, the dam had to close down a lot of their recreational because it was just too low to have people. And the difference between left and right, as the water level keeps dropping, it affects more than 40 million people who rely on the rivers for drinking water, electricity, and crop irrigation. So just to give you a little bit of perspective on this, to show you how massive and huge the canyon is, on the left-hand side, you see that little white dot. That is a boat, men fishing. And we were away from that taking the picture of the boat fishing. It's humongous. But just to let you know, rocks and nature will tell us their history and about the environment. Rock is art. Cairns is rock artistry. These slides were taken in the Canyonlands and Capitol Reef National Parks. We see these kinds of life etchings everywhere we've hiked over the years, from Arizona to Utah to New Zealand to Africa, and they're given many names. So just so you know, and many of you probably already know, pictographs, and that's what these are on these slides, are images, designs made by painting and drawing on rocks with natural pigments, as opposed to petroglyphs, which is a generic petroglyphs, which is rock art carved or scraped into rocks with tools. Rock art is a generic label that actually applies to both pictographs and petroglyphs. And most Native Americans hate the term rock art. To Native Americans, these are not art, but they're sacred images that represent cultural themes, messages, beliefs for a tribe. They're not created for aesthetic purposes. They're created to teach, to warn, or record for those not yet born. It's symbols of their environment. It reveals the history of an entire culture. And one of my favorite, here's some examples of stones or rocks as memorials, talisman, or pilgrimage points. This is on the left is Rainbow Bridge National Monument. It's in the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, Page, Arizona. There are many arches and natural bridges in the Southwest, all across the Southwest, and I chose to focus on the Rainbow Bridge because it had such a tremendous personal effect on me at the time I visited. Discovered 100 years or more ago, Native Americans have known about it for centuries. For many indigenous peoples in the Four Corners region, Rainbow Bridge is a spiritually occupied landscape. It's inseparable from their cultural identities and traditional beliefs. The park rangers there regularly consult with representatives from 6 affiliated tribes: the Hopi, the Kaobab, the Navajo, the Ute Mountain Tribe, the San Juan Paiutes, and the Zuni tribes, ensuring that all voices are heard regarding the ongoing management of the site and keeping people from desecrating the spiritual place. I felt a very deep sense of peace standing near this sacred spot. I'm part Native American, and I felt what my Native American ancestors must have felt when camping here thousands of years ago. I actually heard voices while I was sitting there, and I physically hurt as I saw some people ignoring the signs to walk right up to and through the arch. Apparently, those stones did not talk to them the same way they did to me. Can everybody read what it says on the sign in the back? Okay. And this last slide, second to last slide, to illustrate how stones as art, as a spiritual talisman, can talk to us if we listen. During my trip to Japan, I was getting very claustrophobic, surrounded by thousands of people here to see the cherry blossoms in all the temples. I ducked around a side street, thinking I could just get away and take a deep breath, and I came across these graveyards. It just stopped me dead, and I just had to sit down and listen and watch. I have two friends from Japan, and one of them told me they're called Mizuko Jizo. And Mizuko means water child, Jizo means burial service. It's a term for aborted, stillborn, or miscarried babies. These little statues are made of stone and are said to have a spiritual power for protection and longevity that predates Buddhist beliefs. In Japan, these statues line crowded parks. These Jizo statues are offered in the temples, and then people will dress them up in bibs, caps, put all kinds of jewelry around them, and they're displayed in temple yards. Toys and snacks are lined and left by parents in honor of the souls of the babies not born. And like other cairns of the world, these Japanese Jizo statues are believed to be ancient protectors of the trail, also known as earth bearers, bringing protection along the way. These two photos tugged at my heart more than all the beautiful temples in Japan, more than the cherry blossoms, which was cherry blossom season. Well, maybe not the cherry blossoms. That's art too. Okay. So I'd like to conclude with this last slide, which to me personifies the beauty and majesty of art in nature. It shows us how water and rocks interact to form beautiful canvases of art. And I tried everything I could. I have this in video and it would not come over on the PowerPoint, so you can see the waves wearing away the rocks. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's 2, 4, 5, 6 little sticks. That's our tour group. I was down on the beach right after I was reprimanded for building a cairn, trying to take this picture. Those of us who paint landscapes, no matter if we're painting in oil, pastel, acrylic, watercolor, or any other form of art, we get our ideas from Mother Nature itself. This is how rocks and stones talk to me. I hope you've learned something about that. And now I'm very privileged to turn the podium over to Alice Lieb, who will be sharing with you inside stories about landscape painting and contemporary land art. Alice, you're on.
Hello. I am delighted to be here. And as you noticed with Donna's photo, the ocean can wear away rock from its terrific force. This is a painting by Albert Bierstadt from 1887, as you can see. That rock, too, was worn away by powerful forces of waves. And if you can notice those seals, they look like they're unperturbed, like a day at the beach. Imagine yourself there. Think about what that might smell like. You're on a boat. Those seals are quite a few, like hundreds, maybe. Actually, it's a wildlife preserve, and there are millions of birds and seals today. But we might be able to smell those seals. We also might be able to hear the wind howling with the run-up to that stormy sky. The birds would be calling. This is a noisy picture. Imagine that. Have you been in a place like this in your life? Well, it is a real place. Farallon Island is 20 miles off the coast of San Francisco. And the artist, Alfred Bierstadt, got in his boat. Now remember, it's not a major boat. This is just like a sailboat in 1887. So he's in a treacherous sea sketching this place. He goes back to San Francisco to make this painting. Well, he didn't sell it. The audience back east wasn't interested because the taste of Americans had changed for this kind of a dramatic painting. The painters from New York were going to France to find out what Monet was doing with Impressionism. So Impressionism was coming back to New York at that time, and people were very interested in landscapes that were peaceful. So he didn't sell this, but we happened to pick it up in 1973. So it is at the Museum of Art at the Carnegie today. In the next slide, we are zipping to the year 2012 with contemporary artist Andy Goldsworthy. His sculpture, as you can see, is entitled Stone Sea. What do you notice? We see stone arches, for sure, in random positions, cascading within an enclosure. But with the title of Stone Sea, so where's the water? And what's going on here? We're looking for waves and movement. The water happens to be under St. Louis, Missouri. This stone arch is in the St. Louis Art Museum. Goldsworthy was interested in geology, and he is mining the city's past, the prehistoric past, when the city's bedrock was limestone, formed when the Midwest was covered in water. He used limestone from a local quarry, and he's brought St. Louis's past forward, resulting in Stone Sea. Here's the close-up. Notice the construction worker sitting on one of the arches. Those arches, folks, are 10 feet high. Now, I'm 5'3", so they're large stones, and there are 25 of them. They weigh together 300 tons. So they must be in the basement of that museum. I can't imagine anywhere else they are. But the other thing that's interesting about this piece is that it's self-supporting. There is no cement, there is no mortar. This is called a dry stone technique perfected by the ancient Romans. The next land sculpture is also by Andy Goldsworthy. He was walking in Iron Mountain Park in Connecticut. And this is the same sinuous arch that we saw in the previous piece called wall, and this is called wall drawing. Do you see the old tumble down stone wall underneath it? Have you seen similar walls like this in New England? Anne Marie is saying she has. I have too. We have family in Boston, so once in a while we go to the Minuteman National Park, and they're all over the place. And the old stone walls denote the boundaries for farmers. So they were quite common, and Goldsworthy's wall follows the path of the old one and weaves through a forest. The stones are held together with gravity and friction. Once again, no mortar, no cement. The artist says, people leave their presence in a place even when they are no longer there. The effect of time will darken this stone, like the old one, leaving the artist's presence there too. The real world is this artist's canvas. Goldsworthy says, when we say we have lost our connection to nature, we have lost our connection to ourselves. Stone as material interests many artists, including this one, Richard Long of England. If stones could talk, what would they say about this artwork? When you view this stone ring, what comes to mind? The shape of a circle, the idea of infinity, perhaps, walking in a circle like on a high school track, or walking the labyrinth as Donna had pointed out. We can do that. Would you say it reminds you of a memory or an experience like a campfire? What if the stones in the ring were huge, higher than this room? Where would it be located? And how would the meaning change? Would it be more spiritual, ritualistic, like Stonehenge? These are questions that might be raised by you, the viewer, and not answered by the artist. With contemporary art, you are the clue hunter looking for meaning within the work. So you might also wonder, where did this idea for Elderwater stone ring come from? The artist takes walks every day, long walks. And one day when he was walking, he came upon the village of Elderwater, and there was a quarry there of slate. So, like Goldsworthy, his material is the natural world. So, he picked up pieces of slate, hauled them into his truck, and sent them to Pittsburgh. This piece is in the Carnegie Museum of Art. Well, he included the instructions for the staff there and a drawing on how to place those stones. That's it. He never came to Pittsburgh. He didn't call anybody. They didn't call him. It worked out with the blueprints. So Elderwater stone ring is all about the artist's idea. Well, since this piece of art is in the Carnegie Museum, let's stay in Pittsburgh for a while. I'm going to transport you back in time to our young city in 1845. Here you go. Aha. Pittsburgh on fire. The only stone you may see in this painting are the stone piers on which the bridge is built. If those stones could talk, they would talk about what's going on with their bridge. And it was a wooden covered bridge. It was the Monongahela Bridge from downtown over to the south side. And it was engulfed in flame. It burned down in 15 minutes. If you were traveling over that bridge, you see the covered wagon, well, they would start over, it's a toll bridge. And at the end, there's a little shack. I don't know if you can see that. That's where the fellow's waiting for you to pay your toll. Meanwhile, the artist was on a knoll in Birmingham. I would suspect in the lower part of the slopes on the north side. If in the distance you can see a steeple of a church, and we think that that is an old brick church of the Trinity Cathedral from 1824. It has since been replaced by the stone Gothic cathedral that is there today. Oh, I know what I want to tell you. How did the fire start? Well, there was a woman on 2nd Avenue down around Stanwyck Street, and she was washing her clothes over a fire. It happened to be April 10th, 1845. There was a huge gust of wind at 50 miles an hour. The ember burned down the building next door and just kept going. The city had 2 hoses, fire hoses. They couldn't reach the river, and there was also low water pressure. So unfortunately, 1/3 of the city burned. And here is William Coventry Wall's image of the burned city. And that was on Boyd's Hill, which is today Duquesne University. So he was looking down into the center of town. 2,000 people lost their homes that day. And the interesting part about it, though, I think, is that 400 to 500 new brick buildings were erected within 2 months of that time. And you might wonder, well, what's this have to do with stones? Brick became the go-to material for our city, as we all know, due to the plentiful clay and shale in our region. Brick is a kind of stone, as clay and shale are the raw ingredients of fired brick. They're the products of thousands of years of decomposition and erosion of rocks such as granite. So, as Pittsburgh grew, we needed a central post office. The only way you could get your letters in Pittsburgh before about 1859 was to go to a fellow's house down in downtown Pittsburgh and pick it up. So as we grew, we decided to have a post office, and here you go. This was the first one, and it was at the corner of 5th and Smithfield, across from the old Kaufman's department store. Later, Macy's, now I don't know what it's called, but if you know the clock on 5th Avenue, it's just catty corner, and McDonald's is there today. Check out the stone first. Smooth, tan, maybe limestone. Very sturdy, with a classic look of a Roman arch at the entrance, grand steps, and a portrait in the top center of the arch. The entrance looks important. Pittsburgh wanted to be important. Washington, D.C. had been created with the architecture of the Romans, the Greeks and Romans. So the classic nature of that architecture suited this post office quite well, because it was a government building. But wait, if these stones could talk, what would they say about this crowd? What a contrast. look at the people scrambling to get their mail, and what's going on? Pickpockets, well-dressed woman shoving her way to through the postal windows. I just love this painting. And some sort of a character smoking a cigarette. This artist was self-taught, so he did the best he could. But he did bring attention to the city of the poverty, greed, and danger which enveloped downtown at that time. Chaos reigned, but the artist, David Gilmour Blythe, was the best-known artist of satire in the 19th century America. Stone was used to build many of Pittsburgh's most impressive buildings. So let's take a look at the Cathedral of Learning. Now, this was around 1930 that he painted it, but the Cathedral of Learning took 10 years to build. 1926 to 36, and it took so long due to the Depression in between, they had to stop. But first, let's consider the land of this painting. Pittsburgh first grew to the east due to Mary Shenley. She gifted the city with hundreds of acres that all now include the hospitals of Oakland, the Carnegie Museum, the Cathedral, St. Paul's Cathedral, University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University, Shenley Park. Gone now are the many trees you see here, as well as the train. That would be Panther Hollow. Just by 1910, there were cows in that hollow. There was a farm, big farm. I always think it's interesting to find out what happened before you knew about it. So the Cathedral of Learning was to be the jewel of our city. Today it remains as the second tallest university building in the world, next to Moscow University in Russia. It stands over 535 feet high with 36 floors. It is built of a steel frame overlaid with Indiana limestone. 2,000 rooms and windows. Modern skyscraper with Gothic-like windows. The architect wanted Pittsburgh to have some style. The inside is amazing. And it would make a wonderful field trip from the Masonic Village to go inside to see the nationality rooms. There are 31 of them. And they were meant to show how immigrants have had an impact on the United States. And each room is designed and decorated by Pittsburgh immigrants from these nations. We are a city of immigrants, as you all know. 29 of these rooms are used as classrooms today. 2 are remaining used for display. Just one more kind of a thing I came up that found out about this building is that during World War II, 1,000 Army Air Corps soldiers and engineers were housed and fed in the Cathedral of Learning. How about that? Interesting. So lastly, thinking of skyscrapers, the artist Richard Serra considered the U.S. Steel Building downtown when he created this sculpture in 1985 entitled the Carnegie. It's made of steel, but steel is from iron ore, limestone, and coal products that occur in nature. So you might say that steel is a byproduct of stone. The sculpture has nothing holding it in place except for its weight. There are 15 additional feet below the museum cement entrance, and it weighs 30 tons. The next time you visit the museum, please walk inside the structure. I bet you didn't know you could do that. It's a public sculpture, and you will find there's a square opening at the tippy top, and you feel small in there because it's dark, except for the very top. And it might remind you of an elevator shaft or possibly a smokestack. It's very interesting to walk inside. Richard Serra designed this as a tribute to Andrew Carnegie, who, as you know, gifted Pittsburgh with the Carnegie Museum, as well as the city of Pittsburgh, which became the steelmaking capital in the world in the 20th century. Next is Tim Merrill, who will talk more about the buildings of Pittsburgh. Tim?
Thank you, Alice. I want to back up a minute and talk about Karen's and a personal story that I think my wife Nancy will remember. I grew up in Pittsburgh in a family that did a lot of hiking and canoeing and mountain climbing, and that was my environment. And the steel industry took me to Detroit, where I met a Flatlander, Nancy. And we were married a lot of years ago, but I came up with this idea of a sort of a test trip. Is this wife going to really make it? Let's climb Mount Washington. And I said, you know, there are mountains out there in the east that are covered with trees, but Mount Washington has lots of rocks on the top, and you can see forever. So we set out, newly married, 1968, and started walking up Mount Washington, and the clouds descended. And if you're in a rock field, and it's all rocks, you can't really tell where the trail is, except for cairns. And so we developed this system that we see a cairn, and I'd say to Nancy, you walk off to the next cairn, I'll stay at this cairn, and when you find, and we did that up to the top of Mount Washington, and I said, isn't this beautiful? You can see forever, Nancy. It was clouds. We couldn't see anything.
That's Mount Washington in New England, not Pittsburgh.
Mount Washington in New England, not Pittsburgh.
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, that's exactly right. The other sort of intro is, and Alice got into it a little bit, but I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about architecture, but I want to talk about sort of sculpture and stones and sculpture. And in Washington, D.C., you know, we have monuments that are just wonderful, and certainly the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial, basically stones, and they are just wonderful to take in as a part of realizing stones and monuments, not quite architecture. I'm going to talk about architecture. How do I push this forward?
This button right here, just there you go. The bottom
Okay,
one.
the bottom.
Or the return button.
Okay. So you see here the stones we're going to be talking about. Sandstone, marble, limestone, iron ore, as Alice already said, that's the basic ingredient of steel. Silica sand, which is glass, granite, and as Alice and Donna have said, red brick. So I'm going to be talking about a number of buildings, but I want to say in the mid-19th century, John Ruskin wrote the definitive work on architecture, and he called it The Stones of Venice. And he described in this classic book the different kinds of architecture, Byzantine, Gothic, and Renaissance buildings in Venice. In the late 20th century, Jamie Van Trump, one of the founders of the Pittsburgh History and Landmark Foundation, produced a series of monographs entitled The Stones of Pittsburgh. Stones, in these two monumental books. My presentation tonight, The Stones of Pittsburgh Architecture, well, not rising to the majesty of of the other two works. It's going to describe a number of buildings in Pittsburgh that come from locally derived stones. And I've shown you the stones, and the first building I'm going to talk about is the Dollar Savings Bank. This plan by an architect by the name of Hobbs was constructed using 14,000 tons of brownstone, which is a kind of sandstone quarried in Connecticut, and also pink Quincy, Massachusetts granite, and copious amounts of marble and brass. William Gray of Philadelphia executed the stonework on the facade. Flanking the entrance were two lions, each sculpted on the site from single massive block of quarry-embedded Portland brownstone. You all recognize that building. That's our architectural ultimate creation in Pittsburgh. Famous for Richardson was the architect, and he designed it of exterior pink Milford granite and rock-faced ashlar walls with red mortar, in which he alternated the height of the coursing between narrow and tall concourses. Richardson Romanesque use of arches. See all those arches, the stones, the towers, the angular roofs. That is Richardson Romanesque architectures. Students of architecture from all over the world come to study this building. The Coppers Building and, of course, the Gulf Building, both built of Indiana limestone, and Coppers with a polished granite base and a dark copper roof. In the inside lobby of the Coppers Building, if you haven't seen it, it's just wonderful. It's a very marble infused wall of high marble, and next to it, of course, is the Gulf Tower, 44th century, for many years the tallest building in Pittsburgh, an Art Deco building. I'm wondering, as we get older, how many people remember what Gulf Oil was. Gulf Oil is long gone, but it was, for everybody in this room, I'm sure, knows what Gulf Oil Corporation was, and that's the tower. This is the brick, and this is the Allegheny HYP Club, one of the many brick buildings in Pittsburgh. As was said, bricks were used a lot because of clay and the ability to fire that clay with cheap coal and or natural gas. That, of course, is the Steel Building, and also called the USX Tower, or the United States Steel Building. Harrison, Abramovitz, and Abe in 1970 is, for many years, or still is, the tallest building in Pittsburgh, and for many years the tallest building between New York and Chicago. It's made of Corten steel, which is a particular kind of steel that naturally rusts and forms a coat of rust over the natural steel. And steel comes from iron, which is a stone. Iron ore, which is a stone. It's shaped like a triangle, mirroring the triangle in downtown Pittsburgh. It is now called the U.S. Steel Tower. And that's PPG Place. Some people said that this is one of Pittsburgh Corporation's best gifts to a city. The complex of buildings that make up PPG Place is just incredible. And again, talk about names. How many people remember that PPG stands for Pittsburgh Plate Glass? And that's another thing that's going to be lost, I fear. But that building went up in 1981. And it is a complex of building that is one of the best that I know of in Pittsburgh. So that's pretty much my stones and Pittsburgh buildings. We're going to open this floor to questions and answers, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Donna and let you monitor the.
Okay. What questions do you have? What didn't we tell you that you were expecting to hear? Ann?
At one time, there was a Karen. At one time in the past couple years, there seemed to be a Karen on Deer Run Road on the left-hand side, just before, after School Street.
Still is?
Still there?
Jerry says still is?
No, it's gone. It's gone. They would build up and then somebody would take it down and they'd build up again and somebody would take it down. Maybe Aleppo Township, I don't know.
Oh, I wish I knew where it was. I'd go see it. Didn't know that. Okay.
Are the Karens? Okay, are the Karens put together with any material, or are they just balanced?
They're just balanced.
Okay.
This one right here I bought in a gift shop. This is an Inukshuk. I got it up in Canada. This is what they look like, but they're just stones on top of each other. And it's balanced, yes.
There's an issue on Beaver Road in front of one of the houses on Beaver Road.
You take the back part, I'll take the front.
I'm going to say there's an in-choke in front of the house near the sidewalk on Beaver Road.
I wonder where on Beaver Road towards.
I can't remember. It's close to the church that's there. I don't know what the church.
Anybody here know what she's talking about?
On Beaver Street. On Beaver Street instead of Road. Yes.
Beaver Street
in Slickley.
Okay. There's a cairn in my front yard if anybody wants to come look at it. It's to welcome you into my house. Any other questions for Alice or Tim? Okay, you've got a poem about a cairn.
It's about, not about the cairn, it's about stones.
It's about a stone. Okay, very good. Why don't you stand up and tell us?
You all know me and how I talk about Kosovo all the time. Well, yesterday was June 28th, which is Vidovdan. And that's the most important day, like for the Serbian people. And they have, pardon me? Yeah, and so they have all these beautiful stone monasteries throughout Kosovo that are so important to the Serbian people. But one of them is called Gračanica Monastery. And this was a poem written by Desanka Maksimović, one of the most famous of the Serbian poets. And she wrote, "If only you weren't made of stone, Gračanica. If only you could ascend to the sky like the virgins of Mileševa and Sopoćani," those are other monasteries. "Then crows might not walk about your narthex, and alien hands weed the grass nearby. Or if your bells, Gračanica, did not beat like our forefathers' hearts. If only the saints on your iconostases did not have our builder's arms and feet, or your angels, Simenoda's face." She was the queen. "If only you were not sunk so deep in that soil and in our very selves. If you were not to us a name to swear by. If only you were not made of stone, Gračanica. If only you could be lifted up high. If only you were an apple, Gračanica, that we might put you in our bosom and warm you, cold with age as you are. If only our long-gone forefathers' bones were not scattered about near and far. The cemeteries are real close to the monasteries. If only we could lift you up to Mount Tara, or move you to the churchyard of Killinich, or try to forget the faces painted on your altar. If only you were not made of stone, Grachanitsa. If only you could ascend to the sky. That's it.
Thank you, Nina. That was lovely. Eleanor.
I have an example of a stone inspiring, I have an example of a stone inspiring some art that proved to be a very practical gift. Would you like to see?
Sure.
Karen suggested I bring it up front. There's a bit of humor in this. But you could take a stone like this, I mean, that's what this began as, and my daughter, I'm not sure where she found it, but it inspired her to do a work of art that was very practical. I call this art. It says, we need doing on this side of it. I mean, she put her handwriting on it, and the other side says, finally. Do I ever get to the finally? I'm not sure. Anyway, she's just saying, anyway, I treasure this because it's what she was inspired to make of a stone.
Good. Thank you.
I would just like to add that stones are also used for jewelry, and some of the jewelry that I have seen speak to me in many ways. And I love the people who wear their jewelry and you can look at it and admire the artistry of the people who created it.
I think you've given us an idea for another program. And we're going to be looking for ideas. This is the first or the second in a series. We will have others. The theme is Art is Everywhere. So bring us your suggestions. I saw a note back here.
When I think of stones, the child in me comes out, because I recall getting a stone and using it for hopscotch, to draw the hopscotch, to throw the stone to play the game.
Oh, yes.
And then also down at the rivers, skipping stones, getting stones to skip and to see how many times you could get them to flip in the water. So stones were toys also early on.
Very good. Stones as toys. Just a minute, I have another. What?
I was just going to say, when Tim was talking about monument, I'm surprised he didn't mention Mount Rushmore, which is huge.
Yes.
Monuments carved right into the rock.
Right. Good. Okay.
I'm thinking of the use of stones to identify as a mark on a gravestone when someone visits. And in Prague, at the Jewish cemetery, where all of the headstones are almost piled on one another because there was lack of space. You see all of these stones, and they really do speak.
They do speak. I remember when I was traveling on the West Coast, I would hit all the California missions. And I would go to every single graveyard and all the missions all along the California coast. And it was just so peaceful. I would just sit in there, and you could just hear all the stories. You could just feel the stories. So graveyards are really wonderful. Molly, you have a question?
Back to the cemetery. My parents, they wrote on the front, as most people do with their stone, their names, their birth date, and the date that they expired. But on the back of that stone, and it's a nice size monument, it says parents of Marcia, Molly, and Mike. No last name, but that meant more to me knowing that they were honoring us as their children.
This is wonderful to hear all the stones that have talked to you.
Down in Key West, in the cemetery there's a stone, there's a grave marker that says, "See, I told you I was sick."
That's a good one, Pam. Okay, you
I want to go back to what Gail said about the games. Think about the most important Chinese game, and they play Go, and that's all made out of stones.
Go. I never heard of Go. Did anybody else? That sounds wonderful.
Oh, they play it all the time.
Okay. Okay. I know we're supposed to get you out by 8 o'clock.
One last thing. When I was starting at dental school, at Pitt Dental School, my husband drove me down every week on Sunday night. And the first night that he drove me down, my son picked up a little polished stone and handed it to me. And I kept that with me the full week until Phil picked me up Friday afternoon. And that was the most meaningful stone in my life.
Thank you for sharing your stories about if stones could talk. Up here, there's stones from around the world. If you want to come up, we can tell you a little bit about them. Otherwise, if there are no other thoughts, stories, thank you so much.